The call came on a gray morning, the kind that made Eliza Warren's small apartment feel even emptier than usual. Her grandmother was gone. There hadn't been much left to say between them for years, but when the lawyer mentioned that her grandmother had left her something, a box, Eliza felt a pull she couldn't quite explain. The box arrived 2 days later, wrapped in brown paper and sealed with the kind of precision her grandmother was known for. Inside was a velvet pouch, and within it, 5 identical brass keys. Each had a small tag tied with fading thread. Room 1, Room 2, Room 3, Room 4, Room 5. Eliza turned them over in her palm, confused. The family home had been sold when she was a teenager, after her father's death and her grandmother's move to assisted living. The rooms those keys belonged to didn't exist in her life anymore, just as the people who once filled them didn't either. Yet something about the keys unsettled her, as if they carried a message she wasn't meant to ignore. That night she pulled out a map of her hometown, Havenport, Maine, and marked the address of the old house. She hadn't been back since the sale. The last time she'd walked out of that house, her grandmother had stood in the doorway, arms crossed, refusing to meet her eyes after a fight that ended with words neither of them could take back. "You don't understand what this family is built on," her grandmother had said. Eliza hadn't wanted to understand back then, but now, turning the keys over in her hand, she felt the question tug at her. What had her grandmother meant by that? 2 days later, she was driving north through the endless autumn woods, the box on the passenger seat beside her. The house stood at the end of a narrow lane lined with maples, its white paint now chipped, its porch rail leaning. The new owners, the Callahans, were polite but cautious when she explained who she was. "You're the Warrens' granddaughter?" Mrs. Callahan asked, tightening her cardigan. "We still find things in this place sometimes. Drawers that don't open, floorboards that creak only at night." Eliza forced a small smile and told them about the keys. After some hesitation, Mrs. Callahan agreed to let her look around. "You can start upstairs," she said. "The rooms are mostly the same as they were." The first door she tried was the one that used to be her father's study. The first key slid in smoothly, as if it had been waiting. The room smelled faintly of cedar and dust. On the far wall, the wallpaper had peeled just enough to expose a rectangle where something had once hung. Eliza stepped closer and found faint nail holes in a perfect frame. Her father's photograph used to be there, his graduation portrait, the one her grandmother took down after his death. A hollow space in the wall caught her attention. When she pressed the loose board, it shifted, revealing a small tin box. Inside were folded pages, brittle and yellowed with age. Her father's handwriting, letters addressed to her grandmother. The first one began simply, "Mother, you have to forgive her." The name wasn't written, but Eliza didn't need it. The only her that could have meant anything in those years was her mother, the woman who'd left when Eliza was 8, vanishing after the accident that killed her younger brother. Her grandmother had never spoken of her again. Eliza sank onto the floorboards, the letter trembling in her hand. The words spoke of mistakes, of blame, of something that had happened before the night her brother died, something her father believed could still be set right. But his words had never reached her grandmother. The envelope was sealed, stamped, and never sent. Eliza left the room with a weight pressing against her chest. Outside, the trees whispered against the windows, their red leaves falling in slow spirals. The Callahans had gone quiet downstairs, giving her space. She stood at the top of the staircase, the other 4 keys clutched tight in her hand. Each one seemed heavier now, as if it carried not metal but memory. If the first key had led to her father's silence, what would the next reveal? She looked down the long hallway toward the room that used to be her grandmother's. The door was half open, the shadows inside long and still. Somewhere deep in the house, a floorboard groaned, a sound so familiar it made her chest ache. The air smelled faintly of lavender and old wood, exactly as it had when she was a child. She could leave, drive back to her life, and let the past rest where it belonged. But her grandmother hadn't wanted peace. She'd wanted her to see, to understand, to forgive. Eliza reached for the second key. The second key was slightly different from the first, thinner, more worn, its teeth filed down in a way that made it look almost fragile. Eliza ran her thumb over the cool metal as she stood before her grandmother's old bedroom door. The number on the tag, Room 2, was fading, the ink smudged as if from tears. She hesitated, listening to the muted sounds of the Callahans downstairs, the faint hum of a kettle, a dog's low bark. Then she turned the key. The lock clicked with the tired groan of something that hadn't been touched in years. The room was smaller than she remembered. Her grandmother's four-poster bed was gone, replaced by a guest bed and a dresser that didn't belong. But the scent was still there, that unmistakable blend of lavender, mothballs, and faint smoke. The wallpaper had yellowed, curling near the ceiling. A single photograph remained nailed to the wall above the dresser. Eliza's grandmother at 20, standing beside a man Eliza had never seen. He wore a uniform. His arm was around her waist, but there was a stiffness between them, something unsaid even in the stillness of the image. On the nightstand, a crack in the wood caught Eliza's attention. She crouched, tracing it with her fingers until it gave way, revealing a hidden drawer. Inside was a small diary bound in cracked leather. She hesitated, then opened it. The first page was dated June 3rd, 1958. He came to the house again today. Said it was for the boy, but I know better. The more I see him, the more I think the past never really leaves us. It just hides in the walls, waiting to be found. Eliza read through trembling hands. The entries were sporadic, some short, others written in hurried, almost frantic scrawls. There were mentions of the boy, of the mistake, of what had to be done. Her grandmother wrote not as a woman preserving memory, but as someone trying to bury it. And the man in the photograph? He appeared again and again in the entries. His name was Samuel Rains, a name Eliza had never heard in her family before. The last entry that mentioned him was dated a month before her father's birth. Eliza sat on the edge of the bed, the diary open in her lap. If what the words suggested was true, then Samuel Rains wasn't just some visitor. He might have been her grandmother's secret, one that reshaped the entire lineage of their family. She thought of her father's dark eyes, his quiet temperament, his inexplicable loyalty to a woman who'd raised him with both love and silence. Suddenly, Eliza wondered if her father had known. A floorboard creaked in the hallway. She turned sharply, but no one was there. The air felt heavier now, the light dimmer. She tucked the diary under her arm and stepped back into the hall, clutching the key tightly. Downstairs, Mrs. Callahan looked up from the kitchen table. "Find what you were looking for?" she asked carefully. Eliza hesitated. "Not yet," she said, "but I think I'm starting to understand what she wanted me to see." Mrs. Callahan nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting that answer. "You know," she said, "when we moved in, my husband found something behind the old wardrobe in the guest room. A locket. It had the initials S.R. carved on the back. We thought it belonged to the previous owners before your family." Eliza's chest tightened. "Could I see it?" Mrs. Callahan disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a small tin box. Inside, nestled in a bit of cloth, was the locket. The engraving was faint but unmistakable. S.R. She opened it. Inside was a tiny photograph, her grandmother, younger, smiling in a way Eliza had never seen before. On the other side, the same man from the bedroom photo. Her hands trembled as she closed the locket. "She kept him hidden," Eliza murmured. "Even from us. Some things," Mrs. Callahan said softly, "were meant to stay hidden." Eliza wanted to agree, but the look in her grandmother's eyes in those photos told another story, not shame, but loss. Something taken from her. Something she'd never forgiven herself for. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She sat in her motel room, the diary open beside her, rereading the final entry. "I did what I had to do. For the family. For him. But the house remembers. It always remembers." She thought of the 5 keys, of the weight each one carried. The first had revealed a silence between mother and son. The second, a secret that reached further back than anyone alive could remember. 3 keys remained. Eliza placed the diary and the locket beside the wooden box. The next tag, barely legible now, read room 3. But as she stared at it, she noticed something she hadn't before, faint writing on the back of the tag. She held it to the light. In her grandmother's slanted cursive were 3 words that chilled her blood. "Don't open alone." Eliza woke before dawn, the world outside her motel window still wrapped in a pale, indifferent gray. The 3rd key lay on the bedside table beside the diary and locket, gleaming faintly in the weak morning light. "Don't open alone." The warning sat in her mind like a stone she couldn't dislodge. But she wasn't sure whom she could trust. or who would even believe her if she told them what she'd found. By 8, she was back at the old house. The Callahans were leaving for work, but Mrs. Callahan paused by the porch, a thermos of coffee in her hand. "You're really going back in?" she asked. "That place, it has a way of sticking to you." Eliza managed a thin smile. "I'll be careful." "Careful doesn't help much," Mrs. Callahan said, and then she was gone. Inside, the air was cooler than before. Dust hung like fog in the light seeping through the curtains. Eliza stood in the hallway, staring at the door at the end, room 3. It used to belong to her Uncle Thomas, her father's younger brother, the one no one ever talked about. He had died before she was born. All she knew was that his name had been erased from every family record. No photos, no stories, just a name that used to exist and then didn't. The key turned with a soft, almost hesitant click. The door creaked open, releasing a faint scent of metal and something sharp, like old ink or rain-soaked paper. The room was mostly empty except for a trunk against the far wall. It was battered, its corners rusted, the leather straps cracked from age. Someone had painted over it once, but the paint had peeled away, revealing the original initials burned into the wood. T.W. Eliza knelt and touched the lock. The third key slid in as if it belonged there. When she lifted the lid, a wave of air escaped, heavy with the scent of mold and something almost sweet. Inside were notebooks, sketch pads, and a few scattered photographs. She picked up the top notebook and opened it. The first page was filled with careful handwriting, teenage and precise. June 14, 1973. Grandma says I shouldn't talk to him again, but he keeps showing up near the woods. Says he wants to help me. Says he knows things about father. Eliza flipped through more pages, the entries growing darker. I saw him again. He gave me a photograph of a woman. Said she's my mother. But that can't be right. Grandma said she's dead. A chill crept up Eliza's spine. She turned another page. He told me the truth today. I think I understand now why Grandma hates him. Why she pretends he doesn't exist. The entries stopped abruptly after that. The last one, written in a shaky hand, was dated the day before Thomas's death. He said the house keeps secrets for her. I think it keeps them from us too. Her pulse quickened. She remembered the obituary. An accident, they'd said. A fall from the attic stairs. But reading the words on those pages, Eliza couldn't shake the sense that it hadn't been an accident at all. She turned to the photographs next. The first was of Thomas, young, dark-haired, smiling shyly at the camera. The second was of her grandmother, standing by the same porch that still faced the maple trees, her hand gripping Thomas's shoulder a little too tightly. Behind them, in the window, a faint reflection caught her eye, the blurred outline of a man standing in the shadows. Eliza squinted closer. The man's face was half hidden, but something about him looked familiar. The sharp jaw, the tilt of the shoulders. It could have been her father, or someone who looked eerily like him. She flipped through more photos, hands trembling. One of them slipped from her grasp and fluttered to the floor, landing face down. When she picked it up, she froze. It was a picture of the same trunk she was kneeling in front of, but in the photo, it was open, and something inside gleamed like glass. The next moment, the floorboard beneath her knee groaned and gave slightly. She pressed her hand against it, feeling a gap. Carefully, she pried it open and found a small glass bottle wrapped in an old handkerchief. The cloth was embroidered with her grandmother's initials. Inside the bottle was a folded scrap of paper. She used her nail to pry the cork loose and slid the paper out. The ink had bled, but she could still make out the writing. Thomas, if you ever find this, you must not tell her. Some things die only if we let them. It wasn't signed, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Her grandmother's. Eliza stared at the note until her vision blurred. Every discovery deepened the silence that had defined their family, each secret feeding another, layer upon layer. Her grandmother had known. About Samuel. About Thomas. About whatever truth had fractured the family into pieces no one dared name. The sound of a door slamming downstairs broke her thoughts. She stiffened. "Mrs. Callahan?" she called out, but no one answered. She heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, crossing the hall below. Then silence. Her breath caught. She slipped the letter and notebook into her bag and crept to the doorway. The house was still. The shadows from the trees swayed across the floorboards like restless ghosts. She could hear her heartbeat echoing in her ears. When she finally stepped into the hall, there was no one there. But on the wall opposite the door, scratched faintly into the paint, was something new, words she was certain hadn't been there before. One key left unturned will keep the past alive. Eliza backed away slowly, the third key still warm in her hand. She didn't know who had written it or how, but she knew what it meant. The house wasn't just remembering. It was waiting. Eliza didn't sleep that night. The motel room felt colder than before, as though she'd brought the chill of the house with her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the handwriting on the wall. One key left unturned will keep the past alive. It was her grandmother's voice and something else beneath it, an echo of all those who'd lived within those walls before her. By sunrise, she'd made her decision. The fourth key would be used today. The morning was gray again, a flat and endless sky pressing low over the treetops. The Callahans weren't home when Eliza pulled up to the house, which was just as well. She didn't want witnesses for whatever waited behind the next door. As she climbed the porch steps, her eyes caught on something new, an envelope wedged into the doorframe. It was old, the paper yellowed and brittle, but her name was written clearly in faded blue ink, Eliza. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, creased many times over. The handwriting was her grandmother's. If you've come this far, I can only hope you understand that truth never dies. It waits. The fourth key opens what was never meant to be closed. Don't hate me for what you find. Her hands shook. The fourth key was heavier than the others, darker, as if tarnished by years of use. She knew even before she entered which door it would fit, the attic. Her father had told her as a child never to go up there. It's not safe, he'd said once, his tone clipped, his eyes distant. And she believed him. But now she knew that in her family, unsafe usually meant unspeakable. The attic stairs creaked beneath her weight. Each step released a puff of dust, the air thick with the scent of cedar and old decay. She reached the top and found the door at the far end, small and unremarkable, its paint flaking off in thin curls. The key turned easily. The door swung inward with a groan. The space beyond was dim, the air colder than the rest of the house. Light filtered through a small round window, illuminating sheets draped over old furniture. Eliza moved slowly, pulling one cloth away. Beneath it was a cradle. Empty. Its paint was chipped, one side splintered, as though it had been kicked. A chill ran through her. She stepped closer. Inside the cradle lay a folded blanket and, on top of it, a small envelope. The handwriting again, her grandmother's. For my second son. Eliza's throat went dry. She unfolded the note inside. You were never meant to be hidden, but the world was cruel, and I was weaker than I believed. Forgive me for giving you away. Forgive me for pretending you died. She stared at the words, her breath catching in her chest. Second son. Thomas was the youngest, wasn't he? Unless there had been another. A child her grandmother gave away to keep the family's name clean. She searched the room desperately, opening boxes, pulling aside old sheets. In one crate she found documents, hospital forms, adoption papers, dated 1959. The name of the mother was blacked out in thick ink, but the child's remained, Michael Rains. Rains. The same last name as Samuel. Her grandmother's secret lover. The truth was so simple, it almost felt cruel. The child she gave away had been Samuel's. Her father's half-brother. Thomas's twin, perhaps, or something close enough to destroy everything the family was supposed to be. Eliza's hands trembled as she pressed the papers to her chest. She didn't know what to feel, grief, anger, or a kind of hollow sympathy for a woman who'd lived her entire life inside a lie. Something shifted behind her. A whisper of movement, too deliberate to be wind. She turned sharply. The door to the attic was closing. Slowly, without a sound. Hello. Her voice cracked, barely audible. No answer. She stepped forward, her pulse pounding. The door stopped halfway, the light thinning. She lunged and caught it just before it shut completely. For a moment, she thought she saw something. A figure at the bottom of the stairs, just a shadow in the dimness. Eliza? The voice was male, uncertain. She froze. Who's there? I'm sorry, the man said. I'm Nate Callahan. My wife told me you were here. I just didn't want you to be alone in this place. Eliza exhaled shakily, gripping the papers. You shouldn't sneak up like that, she said, her tone sharper than she meant. Sorry. The door moved, and I thought, well, It doesn't matter. He hesitated, glancing at the cradle. This is what you were looking for? Part of it, she said. Do you know if anyone named Rains ever lived around here? He frowned. Rains? Yeah, there was an old man who worked maintenance at the mill for years. Lived out near Ridge Hollow. Died a few months ago. Why? Eliza swallowed. Because I think he was family. Nate didn't speak. The wind outside shifted, rattling the window pane. You look like you've seen a ghost, he said quietly. Maybe I have, she murmured. They left the attic together. At the bottom of the stairs, Eliza turned the key in her hand. The fourth key had given her truth, but it hadn't given her peace. Later, in her motel room, she searched online for Michael Rains, hoping for something, anything. There was only one obituary. A Michael Rains, age 65, survived by no immediate family. Born in Havenport, Maine. Below the obituary was a small photograph. The face was older, lined, but unmistakable. The same eyes, the same jawline as her father. Eliza closed her laptop. For keys used, one left. Her grandmother's words echoed again in her head. Don't hate me for what you find. She reached for the final tag, its number barely visible beneath the worn paper. Room 5. There was no address, no note, nothing else to guide her. Just the key itself, cold, weighty, and utterly final. Eliza drove without direction, the fifth key resting in the cup holder beside her, gleaming faintly each time the sunlight broke through the clouds. She didn't know where to go, only that every other key had led her back into the house, into the labyrinth of her family's buried guilt. But this one felt different, heavier, final. Her grandmother had said it opened what was never meant to be closed, and now, with only one lock left, Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that what waited for her wasn't a room, but an ending. She stopped at a diner just outside town. The waitress poured her coffee, asked if she was visiting. Sort of, Eliza said absently. Looking for a place that doesn't exist anymore. The woman chuckled. You're in the right town for that. On impulse, Eliza pulled the fifth key from her pocket. You ever seen one like this? The waitress leaned closer, squinting. That's old. Local, though? Looks like something from the mill properties. The workers' quarters used to have locks like that, back before the fire. The fire. The woman nodded. Back in the 60s. Burned half the eastern wing. They said some kid was living there, one of the foreman's boys. No one ever found him. A shiver crawled up Eliza's neck. The foreman's boy. Her thoughts flashed to the name on the papers, Michael Rains. He'd been hidden, given away. If he'd grown up near the mill, it made sense. Her grandmother had said she gave him away for safety. Maybe the safety hadn't lasted. By late afternoon, she found the road to Ridge Hollow, a narrow path winding through dead leaves and pale birch trees. At its end stood the remains of an old brick building, its windows blackened, roof collapsed. This had to be it. She parked and climbed out, her breath fogging in the chill air. The silence was complete, except for the occasional groan of the wind through broken beams. She wandered through what was left of the main floor, the scent of smoke still faintly clinging to the walls even after all these years. In one corner, a stairway led down into what might have been a storage cellar. The door was still there, half-rotted, half-buried in ash. And in its rusted lock, she saw it, the faint outline of the same keyhole design as her grandmother's. Her hand trembled as she slid the key in. It resisted at first, then turned with a reluctant click. The door opened onto a small underground space, dry and cold. A single crate sat in the corner, covered in soot. When she brushed the surface clean, she found her grandmother's initials carved into the lid. Inside the crate were papers, photographs, and a sealed envelope addressed to Eliza Warren. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, tearing it open. My dearest Eliza, the letter began. If you are reading this, you have walked the path I feared you would, the path of truth. I cannot ask your forgiveness, but I must tell you the whole of it, before time buries it again. Her grandmother's words ran across the page in delicate, fading ink. Your father and Thomas were my sons by my husband. But before them, there was another. I loved a man who was not my husband, Samuel Rains. From that love came Michael. I wanted to keep him, but your grandfather would not allow it. He said the family name could not survive such shame. I gave the child away to the Rains family. Years later, he came looking for me, and for the brothers he never knew. I could not face him. I told your father lies. I told Thomas nothing. And when the truth began to surface, it destroyed them both. Eliza's tears blurred the words. The letter continued, Michael died in the fire at the mill. He had come to confront me that night. I never answered the door. The guilt consumed me, and so I locked away every piece of what I had done. The keys were my confession, each one opening a wound I deserved to feel again. Her grandmother's final line was barely legible. The fifth key opens my memory, but it also opens yours. You are free now, Eliza. Do not inherit my silence. Speak the truth, even if it ruins what's left of us. Eliza set the letter down, her hands shaking. Beneath it lay a photograph, her grandmother, Samuel Rains, and a baby between them. The baby's eyes were unmistakably her father's. In another envelope, smaller and unopened, she found a birth certificate. Michael Warren Rains. The wind howled through the broken upper floors, scattering ash like snow. Eliza sat on the cold ground, surrounded by decades of lies that had built the foundation of her life. Her grandmother hadn't left her the keys for redemption. She'd left them as an inheritance of truth, one that demanded a reckoning. When she finally stood, dusk had settled over the ruins. She placed the fifth key on top of the crate, the metal glinting in the fading light. It ends here, she whispered. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye, a small plaque embedded in the wall, blackened but still legible. It bore 5 names, for she recognized Margaret Warren, Henry Warren, Thomas Warren, Samuel Rains, and one newly engraved beneath them, barely visible under soot, Michael Warren Rains. There was space for one more name. Eliza brushed her fingers over it, a hollow understanding blooming in her chest. The past was done, but the truth, now spoken, lived on. Outside, she stood beneath the gray sky, the air biting, her breath steady. For the first time in generations, the silence that had haunted her family was gone. And in that emptiness, she felt something new, not peace exactly, but release. Eliza returned home just before dawn, the horizon faintly glowing behind her as if the world itself were catching fire again, a reflection of the ruins she'd left behind. She parked by the overgrown garden, the box of letters on the passenger seat, and sat in the stillness for a long time. The air inside the car felt heavier than before, carrying the weight of everything she had unearthed. When she finally stepped out, the morning air was sharp and cold. The house, her grandmother's, her father's, hers, stood silent, its walls washed pale by the early light. It didn't feel like home anymore, not in the comforting way it once had. It felt like a witness. She carried the box inside, setting it on the dining table where the family had once gathered for birthdays, for holidays, for the reading of her grandmother's will, the will that had started everything. The memory of that day felt unreal now. 5 names, one of them foreign, and a silence no one dared to break. She took out the photograph, her grandmother and Samuel Rains holding their son. There was something heartbreakingly tender in it, something that defied all the lies and shame that followed. These weren't villains, she realized. They were people who made terrible choices and paid for them in ways words could never measure. Eliza opened her laptop and began to type. Not an article, not a confession, just the truth. She wrote about her grandmother, about the house, about the 5 keys that had led her through the ashes of a century-old silence. She wrote about Michael Rains, the brother her father never knew, the child erased from their history. Her hands shook, but she kept typing. Every word felt like tearing down a wall that had been standing too long. She didn't know what she'd do with it. Publish it, burn it, or leave it sealed in a drawer for someone else to find. But for now, she needed it out of her body, out of the house, out of the bloodline. A soft creak came from the hallway. For a heartbeat, she thought she heard her grandmother's cane tapping against the floorboards, that faint rhythm she'd known since childhood. But it was only the wind, pushing through the cracks in the doorframe. She turned her head toward the window. The garden outside was bathed in pale sunlight, the frost on the grass glinting like scattered glass. Somewhere deep inside her chest, the weight shifted, not gone, but lighter. She whispered to the air, I forgive you. The words didn't sound like absolution. They sounded like surrender, the kind that finally lets you breathe. Later that day, Eliza drove back to the property one last time. The ruins of the old mill were quiet, covered in frost and mist. She walked to the cellar entrance and placed the photograph and the last letter inside the crate, closing the lid gently. The fifth key she pressed into the soil beside it, burying it beneath her palm. "Sleep," she said softly. Then she stood and looked out over the burned field, the blackened earth stretching into the trees. There was no peace here, not exactly. But there was truth, and that, she decided, was enough. When she finally turned away, she didn't look back. The road ahead curved gently through the woods, sunlight breaking in long golden slants. The past didn't disappear. It followed quietly behind her, transformed from a wound into a shadow. But for the first time in her life, it no longer led the way. Back at the house, she left the front door open, letting the cold air rush in. The wind swept through the rooms, lifting the curtains, stirring the dust, as if the house itself exhaled. The old echoes, the arguments, the regrets, the unspoken words, seemed to scatter with it. She picked up her grandmother's box, now nearly empty, and placed it on the porch. The wood creaked as if sighing, relieved to finally be set down. As dusk fell, Eliza stood at the threshold, watching the light fade across the hills. 5 keys, 5 rooms, 5 lives intertwined by silence. All of it had led her here, to this quiet moment at the edge of forgiveness. She closed the door behind her and whispered, "It ends with me." The wind answered, gentle and cool, carrying the scent of winter through the open fields.